Have you ever read a self-help book, felt this just massive surge of motivation, completely changed your entire life for exactly 3 weeks, and
Huh.
then found yourself waking up on a Tuesday right back where you started?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone has.
Right. You
Yeah.
know the exact feeling. You get the burst of inspiration, you go out and buy the expensive new planner, you wake up at 5 a.m. for like a few days, and then slowly the gravity of your old life just pulls you right back in.
It's inevitable.
It feels like you were applying a fresh coat of paint to a crumbling wall.
Yeah, it is an incredibly common and honestly incredibly frustrating cycle. And it happens because motivation is essentially just, well, it's an emotional spike.
Right.
It's a temporary weather pattern.
Yeah.
And you can't build a house out of weather. What we are looking at today isn't about chasing another sunny day of motivation.
No, it's about climate change.
Exactly. It's about looking at the structural code of your reality, recognizing the invisible load-bearing walls of your mind, and, actually learning how to move them.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you are here with us because today we have an absolute mountain of sources on the table.
We really do.
We're pulling from a huge collection of audio transcripts, intricate system maps, this deeply comprehensive manuscript called Architect of Your Own Meaning, and a highly detailed schematic known as the Root Square Chart.
It is a dense, heavy brick of information.
Oh, it's massive.
Yeah.
But our mission today is to decode it for you. We're going to map out exactly how you can evolve from being a mere user of your life, someone just clicking buttons and reacting to the screen, to becoming the actual architect of your reality.
And ultimately, an active participant in an infinite game.
Yes. Which brings up a fascinating metaphor from our sources. Usually when we talk about a graduation ceremony, there's this expectation of completion, right?
Right, like you laid the bricks, put on the roof, cut the ribbon, and the architect points and says, there it is, we're done. Enjoy the building.
Yeah, it's static. You get the diploma, you frame it, you hang it on the wall, and you move on with your life. Built or not built, it's clean.
We like our achievements to be monuments. We want personal growth to have a clear finish line where we can finally just sit down and rest.
But when you step into the world of continuous transformation, that ribbon-cutting ceremony feels completely different.
Totally different.
The architecture of your own meaning is described in these sources as the absolute definition of a graduation ceremony taking place inside a building that we are actively preparing to knock down.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because that's a wild image.
It really is. A graduation inside a building we are about to demolish.
Right. But it makes sense if we realize that before we can build a new, stronger architecture, we have to understand the flawed, cracking foundation we are currently standing on.
We have to look at the default operating system that most of us are running on without even realizing it.
And our sources actually outline this continuous transformation graduation as a cycle of 5 specific stages. They call them the 5 R's of graduation day.
Oh, right. Rectify, refine, render, reverberate, and represent.
Exactly. You rectify the broken foundation, you refine the new architecture, you render it into reality through action, you let it reverberate through your systems, and finally you represent that new state of being.
And then you knock it down and start over.
Exactly. It's a continuous loop. But let's start with that first R. Let's rectify the foundation. The materials call this massive initial shift, moving from R1V to AV1.
Let's ground this in reality before we get lost in the algebra. What exactly is R1V?
So R1V stands for responsive one variable. Let's break that down. Think back to basic math.
Oh boy, okay.
Don't worry, it's simple math. The 1 is the constant. It's the fixed point, the center of gravity that doesn't move. The variable, the V, is the element that changes, constantly adjusting in relation to that fixed 1.
Okay, so in the R1V operating system, the external world is the constant one.
Precisely. Traffic, the economy, your boss's mood, the algorithm on your social media feed, your family's expectations that external chaos is treated as the solid, unmoving thing. And you, the individual, are merely the variable responding to it.
So if I'm operating in R1V, my mood, my actions, my entire sense of identity, they are all just mathematical responses to whatever the world decided to throw at me today.
Exactly. You're entirely reactive.
Yeah.
You're continually adjusting your shape to fit external containers.
Wow.
Right. If the world gives you a win, you feel successful and expansive. If the world gives you a rejection or even just a weird look, your sense of worth collapses.
Because the external world holds the center?
Yes. You are essentially renting your emotional state from your environment.
Renting your emotional state. That's a great way to put it.
The alternative, the upgrade we're exploring today is AV1.
Autonomous variable one.
Yes. In the AV1 configuration, you reclaim the position of one. You become anchored internally by your principles, your targets, and your fundamental truths. You are the constant.
And the external world, with all its unpredictability, becomes the variable that you navigate around.
Exactly. You aren't controlling the world, but you are controlling the center of gravity.
To illustrate just how hard this shift is, there is an absolutely hilarious, yet painfully relatable scenario outlined in our materials. It's framed almost like a stand-up comedy routine.
Oh, the traffic example. I love this one.
It's so good. Okay, picture this. I am stuck in traffic on the 405. It is total bumper-to-bumper gridlock. Now, I have been reading my philosophy. I've been doing my meditation. So I decide I'm going to practice what is called one-over logic.
Naturally.
Right. I take a deep breath. I yield to the reality of the traffic. I tell myself, I am the climate, not the weather. I am holding the position of one over this traffic. I'm basically a serene, glowing monk sitting in a Honda Civic.
A beautiful picture of enlightenment. You are holding the architecture.
I am untouchable. And then a guy in a silver BMW cuts me off.
Of course it's a BMW.
Always. No blinker. Just violently swerves into my lane inches from my bumper. And in less than a quarter of a second, my so-called Unity operator shatters into a million pieces.
Complete collapse.
My enlightenment evaporates. I slam on the brakes, roll down the window, and I scream, I am the storm! R1V mode activated. Use your blinker, you unintegrated heathen.
It's a perfect example because it highlights the exact millisecond the architecture fails. We have to ask, why did that happen? Why did the monk in the Honda Civic instantly turn into a rage monster?
Yeah, why?
What's fascinating here is that this isn't analyzed as a simple failure of patience. It's a failure of structural integrity. You were using the framework of surrender as spiritual bypassing.
Spiritual bypassing. Ouch, that stings a bit. Break that down for me.
But spiritual bypassing is a psychological defense mechanism. It's when we use spiritual concepts or intellectual frameworks, or even just the language of therapy, to avoid feeling uncomfortable emotions or facing reality. In that car, you weren't actually surrendering to the reality of the traffic. You were performing the act of surrender to avoid feeling angry about being stuck.
So it was a fragile intellectual performance, not an embodied reality. I painted over the crumbling wall.
Exactly. And that BMW driver, they were just a jerk on the highway. In the context of your personal transformation, they arrived as a threshold guardian.
A threshold guardian, like a mini-boss in a video game who shows up to test if I actually learned the skills from the previous level.
That's a great way to think about it. They arrived to kick the tires on your newly built Zen wall, and the wall immediately fell over.
It just tipped right over.
Because the BMW driver triggered a pain point, what the sources refer to as a wince. A wince is a physiological signal of misalignment. It's that sudden tightness in your chest or heat in your face.
Right.
Now, a master of the AV1 system feels the wince and runs a noticing protocol. They catch the feeling, name it, check their internal alignment, and consciously adjust the response. But instead of doing that, your ego snapped violently back into R1V mode.
I let the external event dictate my reality again. There's actually an equation in the text for this exact moment. It maps out as traffic rage equals ego over 1 times 1 over BMW driver. I literally handed over the one position. I let the BMW become the constant that dictated my entire physiological and emotional state.
You surrendered your internal sovereignty to someone who couldn't even be bothered to use a turn signal.
It's so embarrassing when you frame it like that.
Well, you became the responsive variable to their chaotic constant.
Yeah.
The harsh truth is, if your spiritual or psychological architecture falls apart because someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't actually have an architecture. You have a hobby.
A hobby. That is devastating, but it is so true. It reminds me of playing an open-world video game. You're walking around thinking you're the main character, making all these big choices, but then you realize you're just an NPC.
A non-player character.
Right. You only have 3 pre-programmed lines of dialogue, and you just walk in a circle reacting to whatever the player does. If I'm stuck in R1V, reacting to every email, every comment, every traffic jam, I am an NPC in my own life.
Which is a terrifying realization.
So the million-dollar question, how do we actually grab the controller? How do we stop being the shadow and start being the source?
To grab the controller, you have to understand the nature of meaning itself. There's a vital concept here called capacitant meaning.
Capacitant meaning.
Yeah. Think of all the abstract concepts we praise in self-help and professional development. Discipline, surrender, work ethic, resilience, methodology. We talk about them as if they are active agents that will come and save us.
Like, if I just find discipline, I'll be fine.
Right. But they aren't active agents. They're just shadows cast by potential. They're capacities waiting to be filled. Discipline cannot get you out of bed in the morning. Discipline is just a concept.
So discipline is just a tool sitting on the workbench. The hammer can't build the house by itself.
Exactly. The concepts have no agency until the self activates them. The self is the universal interface.
I love that.
All breakthrough generation, all transformation has to pass through your active, conscious, messy engagement. You can't just repeat a mantra about being an architect and expect the building to rise. You have to deploy the self into the architecture. You have to pick up the hammer.
Okay, so if the self is the interface and we are ready to pick up the tools, how do we program this new AV1 system? We need to build actual physical walls in the mind, and the blueprints provided give us the foundational architecture.
The 4DP.
Right, the 4DP, the four-dimensional pillars. These are the load-bearing walls of the AV1 operating system. Target, truth, totally, and title.
These 4 pillars are essential. If you try to build a life system without these, the structure will eventually collapse under the weight of reality.
Let's break these down. First pillar, target.
This is about having flexible, dynamic goals. It's not a rigid, hyper-specific endpoint that you obsess over to the detriment of everything else. It is a direction that you aim your energy toward, one that is allowed to move and evolve as you gather new information.
Because if your target is completely rigid, like I must be a millionaire by age 30 using exactly this e-commerce dropship model, and the economy changes or your industry gets disrupted, your entire building cracks.
It shatters.
You shatter because the rigidity made you fragile. So flexibility is key for the first pillar. What about the second pillar, truth?
Truth is radical self-honesty. And frankly, this is arguably the hardest pillar to construct.
Oh, I believe that.
It's about developing the capacity to catch your own mind's highly sophisticated defense mechanisms. We are incredibly good at rationalizing our bad habits.
Oh, yeah. We say we are researching when we are actually just procrastinating on YouTube for 3 hours.
Exactly. We project our insecurities onto our partners or our colleagues. We live in polite fictions. The truth pillar demands that you see reality exactly as it is, without the sugarcoating, but also without the catastrophic doom spiraling.
Just the raw data.
Just the data. You have to look at your bank account, your relationship, or your health, and acknowledge the exact coordinates of where you are. You can't map a route to a destination if you lie to yourself about your starting point.
I can absolutely see how that is a load-bearing wall. If your foundation is built on a lie, it cannot hold weight. The friction of reality will eventually crush it.
Yes.
Then there's the third pillar, totally. The materials refer to this as dimensional awareness. But totally is kind of an abstract word. What does dimensional awareness actually mean in practice?
Dimensional awareness means understanding that your human experience is never just happening on one flat level. It is happening on multiple layers simultaneously.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Let's say you are about to give a big presentation at work, and you start panicking. If you lack dimensional awareness, you collapse your entire experience into a single narrative. I am terrified, I am going to fail.
Which is an awful feeling. You're just consumed by it.
Right. But to be totally aware is to separate the layers. You zoom out and realize, okay, on a physiological level, my heart rate is elevated and my palms are sweating. On a cognitive level, my brain is generating a worst-case scenario thought about getting fired. On an emotional level, I feel fear.
Oh, wow. That creates so much space.
It does.
It stops me from over-identifying with a temporary state. I'm not a terrified person. I am simply a person experiencing elevated cortisol and a negative thought loop.
Exactly. It de-escalates the threat, which leads perfectly into the fourth pillar, title. This introduces the concept of noun ships.
Noun ships. I love this term. Break this down.
Noun ships are the fluid identities we navigate. The titles we give ourselves: the dependable one, the creative, the failure, the CEO, the martyr.
We hold on to those so tightly.
We really do. In an R1V system, these titles are usually handed to us by society, our families, or our past traumas, and we defend them fiercely. We think they are us.
But in AV1?
In an AV1 system, titles are flexible modes that you enter and exit. They're tools, not life sentences. You hold your identity lightly. When you go to work, you put on the noun ship of leader. When you come home, you take it off and put on the noun ship of partner or parent. You don't let one title consume the entire architecture of who you are.
Target, truth, totally, title, the 4DP. And these pillars serve as the foundation for what is called the root square chart.
Now, this is where it gets really visual.
Yeah, when I first looked at this chart in the source materials, it looked like a wildly complex family tree or a corporate org chart. But it's actually a spatial hierarchical visualization of how complex life outcomes assemble themselves.
It contrasts sharply with the normal linear goal-setting advice we hear all the time.
Normal goal setting assumes that transformation is a straight line, right? A to B to C to success. You write down the goal, you list the steps, and you walk the path.
But the root square chart reveals that true transformation is multidimensional synthesis. You don't just progress along a single narrow line, you grow in multiple interconnected directions simultaneously, much like the root system of a tree.
Let's walk the listener through the structure. It builds from the bottom up. At the most granular microscopic level, you have atoms.
These are your daily habits, your micro behaviors, the corner-second decisions you make, choosing water over soda, pausing before you reply to an angry email. Those are atoms.
Okay. And over time, these atoms synthesize and build up to form leaves, which represent specific, tangible skills or informed perspectives.
Right, so being able to write clear copy is a leaf. Knowing how to actively listen is a leaf.
And then those leaves combine to form the four main branches.
And those four branches map out the major domains of your lived experience: power, presence, proclivities, and proclamations.
Let's define those briefly.
Power represents your physical vitality, your energy, your capacity to act. Presence is your relational depth, your emotional regulation, how you show up with others.
Got it.
Proclivities are your natural talents, your cultivated skills, your unique mastery. And proclamations are the boundaries you set, the statements you make, the actual imprint you leave on the world.
And when those four distinct branches finally integrate, they form the root, the ultimate outcome. This could be authentic creative mastery or integrated professional excellence or profound personal peace.
Yes.
But here's the part that blew my mind. There's a specific mathematical principle outlined for how these leaves actually combine to form a branch. It's called the fourth quarter principle.
This is such a brilliant concept.
It states 75% construction plus 25% overlap equals 100% expression. How does that work in reality?
This is a critical insight into how the human brain actually learns and integrates complex behaviors. Let's use a professional example. Let's say building your proclivities branch in your career requires three specific leaves, three distinct skills.
Okay.
Leaf 1 is beta analysis. Leaf 2 is public speaking. Leaf 3 is strategic empathy. You spend time building Leaf 1 on its own. You practice Leaf 2. You study Leaf 3. That isolated skill building is your 75% construction.
So you're just drilling the basics.
Right. But while they are separate, they aren't mastery.
Mm.
The magic, the actual transference happens in the 25% overlap. This is the seamless, fluid way you apply skill 1 through skill 2 while utilizing skill 3.
Oh, right. So it's like a senior manager leading a tough meeting. They're reading the room and validating emotions, that's strategic empathy, while clearly communicating a new direction, that's public speaking, based on a deep understanding of the quarterly metrics, that's data analysis.
Right.
It happens all in one single breath. The separate skills blur into a unified field of competence.
Precisely. The 25% overlap is where separate mechanical capabilities become a holistic, artistic expression. It's where the musician stops thinking about the chords and just plays the music.
Okay, I love the elegance of this, but I have to pause and push back here for a second. Let me play devil's advocate.
Please do.
We're talking about root square charts, 4DP, atoms building to branches. Isn't this really just a very fancy, highly jargon-filled way of saying, set a big goal, break it down into smaller steps, and work backward?
It does sound similar on the surface.
I mean, isn't that what everyone from Tony Robbins to my high school guidance counselor has been saying for decades? Why do we need new math for this?
It sounds similar, which is exactly why it's a common trap.
Yeah.
But the underlying mechanics are entirely different. If you just set a goal and work backward, you become fixated on the destination. You are trying to force a future state. You become rigidly attached to an outcome that you ultimately cannot control.
Okay, so how do these materials correct that?
The materials correct this using an exact logic sequence. Orientation leads to targets, which leads to goals.
Orientation leads to targets, which leads to goals.
Oh.
Okay. But wait, if I don't focus on the goal, how do I know I'm making progress?
Yeah.
Give me a real-world example of prioritizing orientation over a goal in, say, building a business.
Let's look at a startup. If the founders set a rigid goal of hitting $10 million in revenue by Q4, they will reverse engineer their actions to hit that specific number.
Makes sense.
But they might push aggressive, annoying sales tactics, burn out their team, or release a subpar product just to hit the metric. They might hit the goal, but they destroy the foundation of the company in the process. Their orientation was compromised by their obsession with the goal.
Ah, I see. They won the battle but lost the war.
Now, if they prioritize orientation, they orient themselves toward creating undeniable value for the customer, maintaining high product quality, and fostering a healthy team culture. That is their orientation.
And the target.
Their target might be expanding into a new market. And then $10 million in revenue. That simply emerges as a natural byproduct of maintaining the correct orientation. Look at the formula provided, the sources, the one with the curly brackets.
Oh, right, the equation. Let me find it. Okay, here it is. Orientation to target to goal when aligned, or reorientation protocol when drift detected. Let's translate that math into plain English for those of us who haven't looked at a calculus textbook in a while.
It means that orientation is a continuous differential process. It's not a destination. It's a compass heading. It's like steering a ship across the ocean. You don't just point the wheel at the destination, lock it in place, and go to sleep in the cabin.
Because you'll crash.
Exactly. The wind changes, the currents shift, storms arise. Orientation is the daily, moment-to-moment practice of alignment. You check the compass, you feel the wind, you adjust the sail. If you maintain the correct orientation and adjust when drift is detected, you will naturally hit your targets, and the goals will take care of themselves.
I see. So the linear goal setter is obsessed with the treasure chest, and they usually crash the ship on the reef trying to get there. The AV1 architect is obsessed with the compass, and because they master the sailing, they reach the destination intact.
Exactly. Amateurs pursue goals, professionals maintain targets, masters embody orientation.
That is such a powerful distinction. Okay, so we have our compass. We have the load-bearing walls of the 40P. Now we need to understand the structural physics of how change actually happens within those walls.
We're moving into the mechanics of transformation.
Right. The materials call this metamatics, and it starts with a master formula. AB plus CD equals transformation.
This is where we operationalize everything we've talked about so far. This formula explains the physics of how new realities are generated.
I remember algebra, and this looks deceptively simple. But I know there's depth here. What exactly are A, B, C, and D?
In this framework, A and C are what are called iterators. Think of iterators as the content, the raw material, the potential energy. It's your ambition, your desire, your raw skill, or the action you want to take.
Okay, so A and C are the fuel.
Yes. B and D are the delineators. These represent the context, the constraints, the environment, the physical laws of reality, or the boundaries that shape the content.
Content and context. Iterators and delineators. Okay, there is another brilliantly tragic example provided in the sources to explain what happens when we misunderstand this relationship. The infamous IKEA bookshelf disaster.
Yes, the Blig bookshelf scenario, a classic tale of human hubris.
It's so funny, right? So someone decides they're going to become an integrated builder. They go to IKEA, they buy this massive, complex bookshelf, and they bring it home. They look at the box and declare, I am not just assembling furniture, I am a master of particle board. I am bringing massive intention to this process.
They are trying to force what is called the X1 iterator first mode. They are bringing maximum content, maximum personal energy, maximum motivation.
But they are completely ignoring the delineator, the context, the reality of the situation.
Exactly. The context is that the instruction manual is terrible. It's literally just a cartoon guy shrugging. They don't have a flat surface to build on. And they are missing Dowell 4B.
But instead of adjusting to the context, instead of acknowledging the constraints, they just keep forcing the content. They keep chanting their motivational mantra and forcing screws into the wrong holes.
And the result?
A bookshelf that leans at a terrifying 45-degree angle, the Leaning Tower of Regret.
What's fascinating here is that it perfectly illustrates why pure motivation is mathematically insufficient for transformation. If you try to force content without respecting the context, your system stalls or breaks.
You cannot force an iterator without a delineator.
Right. Your ambition, the iterator, needs the structure of a scheduled delineator to become a real project. A concept is just a capacitant shadow. It requires the friction of reality, the constraint of a boundary, to become solid.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just about slamming iterators and delineators together. There are 5 operators of metamatics that define exactly how they interact. It's not basic math. It's the language of relationships.
Let's break these down because this is the cheat code for designing your life.
First, we have division, the slash symbol, A over B.
Division in metamatics doesn't mean cutting things in half. It means filtered by or contextual shaping. If you have A divided by B, it means you're Raw potential A is being filtered by your environment or constraints. B.
It's like water flowing through landscape. The water is the iterator, the pure energy. The terrain is the delineator, the context. The water doesn't just go wherever it wants. The terrain shapes the river's path.
Exactly.
If your massive entrepreneurial ambition is filtered by a tiny startup budget, the budget is the terrain. It dictates what is actually possible. It forces the ambition into a specific, narrow channel of innovation.
Precisely. The constraint shapes the flow. The second operator is subtraction, the minus sign. This represents elimination or clearing the field.
Like removing the static so you can actually hear the signal. The example given is identity minus roles.
Yes. If you strip away all the roles you perform every day, employee, parent, sibling, friend, what is left? You use subtraction to find the core autonomous self. You have to remove things to discover what is structural.
Wow, that's powerful. Then we have multiplication. The asterisk. This is synergistic amplification. This is not just adding two things together. This is a reciprocal feedback loop where both sides strengthen each other simultaneously.
Right. Give me a tangible example of that. How do things multiply in real life?
Well, think of technical skill multiplied by deep passion. Let's say you were learning to code. If you just learn to code without caring about what you build, it's a slog.
It's terrible.
If you have passion but no skill, you're just dreaming. But when you actively drive your coding skill development and you let your passion dictate the app you're building, the presence of each element exponentially increases the effectiveness of the other.
The skill gives the passion a functional vehicle. The passion gives the skill relentless momentum. You don't just learn twice as fast, you learn 10 times as fast. They multiply.
They multiply, got it. The fourth operator is addition, the plus sign, integrative synthesis.
Addition is about creating wholeness while maintaining distinctness. Think of intense focus plus restorative recovery. You need both proportionally to create sustainable high performance.
Right, because they don't multiply each other in the exact moment. You can't be intensely focused and resting at the same time.
No, but you need the sum of both over a week to be a whole, functioning human.
And finally, the fifth operator, integration. The symbol is a plus sign inside a circle, the synthesis operator.
This is the pinnacle of the architecture. This is synthesizing complete relationships. It connects two separate division relationships.
Like A over B integrated with C over D.
Yes. It maps out how multiple filtered systems work together simultaneously to create a complex, emergent reality.
Okay, so let's map that to a real human day. My creative energy, filtered by my morning routine, integrated with my relational commitment, filtered by my emotional bandwidth. That creates a complete, holistic, daily practice.
It's a beautiful way to look at life.
It is. But how do we avoid getting stuck? How do we avoid becoming the guy screaming at the IKEA box because we forgot to look at the instructions?
To prevent systemic blindness, you have to use a crucial mechanism called the inversion kick. This is the secret to balanced mastery. You must consciously and intentionally alternate between the iterator, the content, the doing, and the delineator, the context, the structuring, to maintain cognitive balance.
Like toggling back and forth between two different lenses.
Yes, you cannot just be the flowing river all the time. Sometimes you have to step out of the water, look at the landscape, and design the riverbanks. If you default to only one mode, you experience cognitive tunnel vision.
So the inversion kick is the formal practice of switching your interface.
Exactly. Work in the business, then work on the business, experience the emotion, then analyze the trigger.
Okay, so we have the load-bearing walls. We have the mathematical operators to filter, multiply, and integrate our actions. Now we need to know how this actually sequences in time. If I wake up tomorrow morning, what is the actual chronological sequence of doing this? Where does step one begin, and how do I know when I'm finished?
This brings us to the 11-step operational flow.
Right. The operational flow is a chronological map of a single transformation cycle. It starts with step one, the event atom.
This is the fundamental starting point, the raw seed of intention or the initial spark of an idea.
Let's use a running example to make this concrete. Let's say my event atom is, I want to write a novel. That's the raw spark. What's step two?
Step two is duality. You have to identify the complementary tension required to make it real. For writing a novel, the duality might be the tension between wild, free-flowing imagination and the rigid discipline of sitting at the keyboard for 2 hours every morning.
And step three is synergy.
Yes. What emerges from the fusion of those two tensions? A clarified creative vision grounded in a realistic work ethic.
So steps 1 through 3 are basically setting the atomic structure in the mind. Then we move into the middle steps where it gets physical. Step 4 is space-defined. I have to clear off a desk in the spare room and block out 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. on my calendar.
Step 5 is analytical processing. I outline the plot, I structure the chapters.
Step 6 is physiological mapping. Now wait, pause here. Explain physiological mapping. How does that apply to writing a book?
Physiological mapping is crucial. It's rehearsing the embodied sequence of the action before you take it and tuning your nervous system to the task. It's not just mental planning, it's physical alignment.
Interesting.
For writing, it means noticing how your body feels when you sit at that desk. Are your shoulders tight? Is your breathing shallow because you are anxious about the blank page? Physiological mapping is deliberately regulating your breath, settling your nervous system, and anchoring a state of calm focus in your physical body before your hands touch the keyboard.
You prime the machinery. And then finally, step 7 is execute, taking the action. I sit down and actually write the first chapter.
And this is precisely where 90% of people think the process ends. They took the action, they executed, they checked the box on their habit tracker and walk away. But this raises an important question. What happens if you hit step 7 and just stop?
That's exactly what I was wondering. I executed, I wrote the words. Why isn't that enough? Why are there 4 more steps? Why is step 8, temporal culmination, so vital?
Because execution is just an event. It's a single point in time. Transformation is an integration. If you just execute and walk away, you haven't changed. You just did a chore.
Oh, wow.
Temporal culmination, step 8, is the conscious recognition that a result has actually been achieved and a new state has been reached. And there are 3 distinct types of culmination.
Right, because transformation isn't always crossing a literal finish line with confetti.
Exactly. The first is event culmination. This is clear and tangible. You type the end on the manuscript, you cross the marathon finish line. It's definitive.
And the second?
The second is threshold culmination. This is subtler. It's a capacity shift. You don't have a dramatic finish line, but you suddenly realize that sitting down to write for 2 hours no longer feels like torture. It feels natural.
Right.
You cross the threshold of capacity.
And the third type?
The third is saturation culmination. This is a profound point of no return. Your identity has shifted so entirely that the old way of being literally becomes inaccessible to you. You couldn't go back to not being a writer, even if you tried.
So step 8 is taking a beat to recognize that culmination. I did it, and I am different. But we still have steps 9, 10, and 11.
Yes, the harvesting steps. Step 9 is knowledge-directed creation, naming what was actually created or learned during the execution.
Step 10 is redualization.
You reflect and refine. What worked? What felt misaligned? How could the duality be balanced better next time?
And step 11 is comprehensive comprehension. You extract the universal wisdom from the specific act, turning the experience into a generalized principle you can apply elsewhere.
If you don't do those final 3 steps, if you don't harvest the learning, you repeat the cycle horizontally. You stay on the exact same floor of the building instead of taking the elevator up. You just keep reinventing the wheel every time you try to learn a new skill because you never extracted the meta pattern of how you learn.
Precisely. The goal of the 11-step cycle isn't just about getting the specific result, like finishing the book. It's about upgrading your overarching operating system so that the next cycle you run is faster, deeper, and more integrated.
Okay, this is a profound, empowering architecture for building oneself up.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the dark side of this equation.
Yeah, we do.
What happens when an operating system actively rejects truth? What happens when a system operates in pure arrogance, ignoring context and delineators entirely?
The materials provide a very stark historical macrosystem case study to illustrate ultimate structural failure. And I want to be very clear with you listening right now. We are going to objectively report the structural analysis provided in our sources to understand systemic collapse. There is no ideological endorsement here. We are looking at the math of disaster.
The case study analyzes Adolf Hitler's World War II strategy as a catastrophic, fatal failure of system architecture.
It serves as a chilling macro example of what happens when the 40P pillars, specifically truth and totally, are completely abandoned by a system. The analysis points out that this collapse was a fatal failure of what is termed empathetic research.
Right, and we need to define empathy in this specific strategic context. It doesn't mean sympathy or compassion. It means the cold, rigorous ability to accurately assess the reality, the capabilities, and the human drive of the opposing force. It means seeing the delineator clearly.
The analysis details 3 key structural distortions that cause the system to consume itself. The first is the myth of divine infallibility.
This is the ultimate fatal rejection of the feedback loop. When a system or a leader believes they are infallible, that they hold absolute, unquestionable, iterative power, They actively reject all warning signs and data that contradict their vision.
The analysis uses the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, as the prime example.
Yes, the leadership system dismissed the logistical reality of the vast terrain and the brutal Russian winter because the ego of the system believed its own infallibility would magically overcome physical constraints. It was an extreme, macro-level case of trying to force an iterator without acknowledging the delineator.
The second distortion highlighted is the fiction of enemy inferiority, blinding the system to actual data.
Yes, the total rejection of the truth pillar. Because the system's ideology was rooted in racial supremacy, it systemically and delusionally underestimated the industrial production capacity of the United States and the mobilization endurance of the Soviet Union.
Furthermore, by persecuting and exiling brilliant scientists, physicists, and intellectuals based on rigid racial ideology, the system actively purged itself of the diverse talent that was absolutely critical to technological innovation.
It voluntarily blinded itself to actual data and crippled its own capabilities just to preserve a fictional narrative.
And the third distortion is the illusion of unilateral control, extreme micromanagement and ignoring local context.
This is the complete rejection of the catch-all pillar, the loss of dimensional awareness. It is the belief that you can dictate every granular outcome from a central, isolated point without trusting the operators on the ground who are actually interacting with the environment.
The stand and die orders given at Stalingrad, for instance, prioritize ideological pride over tactical, ground-level reality. The system consumed itself because it became too rigid to adapt to the environment it was trying to conquer.
It's like trying to build an AV1 system, but instead of aligning with reality, you're just screaming at the BMW driver forever while your car drives off a cliff.
Exactly. The system is so obsessed with its own supremacy and its own fictions that it becomes rigid, fragile, and ultimately self-destructive.
If we connect this back to the epistemological integrity of the 4DP, if you refuse to see the actual dimensions of reality,
Totally.
and you actively reject accurate data because it hurts your ego, truth, the architecture will inevitably collapse.
Supremacy in this analytical framework is presented as the ultimate fatal manifestation of an unexamined R1V ego. It is a massive strategic liability that wires a system to respond to its own illusions rather than the friction of reality.
That is a chilling but incredibly clear macro-level example. It proves that gravity always wins against delusion. We have to ensure our internal architecture remains tethered to reality.
Which brings us to the next vital piece of the puzzle. How do we keep the math grounded? It has to leave the abstract intellectual mind and enter the body. It has to survive contact with our actual relationships.
Because transformation isn't just a cognitive exercise you do on a whiteboard. If it doesn't become embodied, if it doesn't change how your nervous system reacts, it isn't real. To address this, we look at the five-fold path of embodiment.
The 5 paths are sensation, breath, movement, stillness, and expression. Walk us through how these anchor the architecture.
Sensation is the baseline. It's feeling the body clearly, noticing the wince, the tension, the temperature. Breath is the regulator. It's how you actively manage your nervous system's energy flow. Movement is being fully present in your physical form, how you navigate space.
What about stillness?
Stillness is the capacity to sit with discomfort and listen to your body's deeper wisdom without needing to distract yourself. An expression is the output, letting your truth, your boundaries, and your needs move through you authentically into the world. If you suppress your expression, you are bottlenecking the transformation inside your body.
But expression can get incredibly tricky when it involves other people. It's easy to be integrated when you are alone in a room. It's much harder when you introduce family dynamics. And there's another fantastic comedy-style example provided to illustrate this hazard, the Thanksgiving Aunt Carol scenario.
Ah, yes. The ultimate stress test for any newly constructed personal architecture. A classic relational crucible.
Right, so picture this. The newly integrated host, fresh off learning all this metamatics architecture, goes home for Thanksgiving. Aunt Carol leans over the turkey, looks them up and down, and hits them with the classic family jab. Still single, when are you going to settle down and get a real job?
Brutal.
Historically, the host would have just defensively eaten mashed potatoes until they passed out. But this year, they decide to establish a relational field. They stand up, look Aunt Carol dead in the eye, and say, Aunt Carol, I am currently occupying the autonomous variable 1 position. You are attempting to make me a responsive variable to your societal expectations. Let us instead find the third in this relational field and co-create a new paradigm.
And Aunt Carol's response to this profound invitation.
She just stares blankly, blinks twice and asks, "Can you just pass the gravy?"
Of course she does.
To which the host absolutely loses it and screams, "The gravy is a capacitant shadow, Carol. It has no independent agency unless poured over the turkey of truth."
It is hilarious, but it illustrates a profound, very common misunderstanding of relational mathematics. It's fascinating here is why this integration failed so spectacularly in practice.
Why did it fail? I used all the right words. I stood in my AV1 position.
Because you were experiencing what is called field confusion. You tried to use mathematics as a weapon to block vulnerability rather than a tool to create connection. You were trying to force a high-level conscious co-creation onto an unconscious broadcasting environment.
Explain the difference between those environments.
A conscious relational field requires mutual attunement, safety, and a shared desire for visibility. That's where you can do deep transformational work together. Aunt Carol asking about your job across a crowded table is an unconscious broadcasting environment. She is just running a script.
So I can't force an AV1 relationship.
You cannot force an AV1 relationship. You cannot demand transformational depth from a Thanksgiving dinner table.
So I can't force Aunt Carol to do mathematics with me over the stuffing. What is the correct move then?
The correct move in that scenario is what the framework calls a compassionate boundary.
Like, "Aunt Carol, I love you, but I'm not discussing my career today. However, this turkey is absolutely fantastic."
Exactly. You hold your center without demanding that she understand the math behind it. The architecture isn't a weapon to win arguments at dinner or prove how evolved you are. The architecture is just who you are. You protect your integration, you regulate your own nervous system, and you engage gracefully. You can't just throw equations at people and expect them to transform.
That is a massive relief. I will leave the turkey of truth alone. Okay, we have arrived at the grand finale. We've built the foundational skills, we've learned the math, we've walked the 11 steps, we've embodied the practice, and we've survived Thanksgiving. But how do we make this permanent? How do we ensure the lights on our new control panel don't just flicker and die out after a few months?
Transformation fading is the default trajectory of human behavior. You have a brilliant flash of insight, a massive burst of change, and then a slow collapse back to baseline. To prevent this, to achieve permanence, you have to build out the 5 pillars of integration architecture.
Let's walk through these because this is the difference between a temporary diet and a new lifestyle. The 5 pillars are environmental design, identity reinforcement, system automation, feedback loops, and social integration. How do these lock the transformation in place? Let's use our writing a novel example from earlier.
Perfect. Let's look at environmental design. If you rely on raw willpower to write every morning, the transformation will die because willpower depletes. You have to physically design your environment to remove friction. You leave your laptop open on the desk, the software already loaded, the coffee machine preset. The environment pulls you into the behavior.
That makes total sense. What about identity reinforcement?
Identity reinforcement means you stop saying, "I'm trying to write a book," and you start stating, "I am a writer." You change the nounship.
What about system automation?
System automation means making the behavior non-negotiable and removing the decision-making process. You don't wake up and ask, "Do I feel like writing today?" The system dictates that from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., writing occurs, period.
And feedback loops are essential for the truth pillar. You need a way to measure reality. This could be word count tracking or joining a writer's group that gives you honest critiques. You need external reality to test your internal assumptions.
Exactly. And social integration.
You have to surround yourself with a social network that supports and normalizes the new identity, not the old one. If you are trying to be a dedicated writer, but you only hang out with people who mock ambition and spend every night at the bar, the friction will eventually wear you down. You need a community where your new behavior is the baseline standard.
And when you lock these pillars in place and you run these cycles across multiple domains in your life, your health, your career, your relationships, something mathematically incredible happens. The sources outline what is called the mastery equation.
Let me attempt to read this notation. Mastery equals limit n approaches infinity sum of transformation cycle, I times product of 1 plus alpha. Okay, I'm going to need you to save me here. Translate the calculus.
It looks intimidating on the page, but the concept is beautifully poetic. Mastery isn't a destination. It is the infinite accumulation of completed transformation cycles. But here's the critical key. The cycles don't just add up, they multiply.
Oh,
Every new cycle's value is multiplied by the compounded, synergistic amplification of all the previous cycles you've completed.
It's like compounding interest in a bank account, but instead of money, you are compounding your own capability to evolve.
Exactly. It's the cascading multiplication effect. When you run the 11-step flow and master the discipline in your fitness routine, that's cycle 1. But that discipline doesn't just sit isolated in a fitness bucket in your brain. It structurally alters your capacity.
So when you start cycle 2, say, improving your focus in your career, that effort is amplified by the discipline you already built, which in turn amplifies your emotional regulation in your relationships for cycle 3.
The learning velocity actually accelerates.
Yeah.
The analysis states that by the time you reach cycle 5, you are completing transformations 78% faster and with significantly less effort than you did in cycle 1.
That's incredible. Why is it so much faster?
Because you are no longer learning a specific, isolated skill. You have upgraded the meta operating system itself. You've learned how to transform.
And as you complete these compounding cycles, a profound shift occurs. Resistance dissolves. The internal friction of change approaches zero. Can I change? Is no longer a terrifying existential question. Your track record proves it mathematically. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can map this journey across the 3 phases of mastery.
Right. We move from competence to integration to devotion.
Break those down for me.
In the beginning, in the competence phase, transformation feels like effort. It is heavy. You are striving. You are consciously trying to change your habits. It requires massive cognitive load. In the middle phase, integration, it feels less like a struggle and more like a practice. You are refining the systems, adjusting the environment, and guiding the emergence of the skills.
But in the final phase, embodied mastery.
Devotion.
Yes. In devotion, the distinction between working on my transformation and just living my regular life completely disappears. You aren't someone who works on personal development anymore. You are simply oriented toward continuous growth as your baseline default state.
You are in love with the practice itself. Not because it gives you a shiny reward at the end, but because the practice is who you are. You can hold contradictions without tension. You embody fierce discipline alongside yielding flexibility. You plan meticulously, yet you surrender to the reality of the moment. They dance together flawlessly.
Wow. If we step back and look at what we've covered today, from a reactive user screaming in traffic, completely at the mercy of the world, to an architect mapping the root square with mathematics, to an embodied participant dancing with the practice in a state of devotion, what an incredible trajectory.
It is the ultimate human journey. But there is one final profound concept that we need to touch on, the legacy of practice. Because while this entire architecture is intensely personal, transformation is ultimately deeply relational. Years from now, someone you will never even meet will benefit from the quiet, difficult integration work you chose to do today.
Because the person I guided, the person I showed patience to because I was regulated, went on to guide others.
Exactly. Your personal breakthrough in recognizing your own fragmented knownships becomes a template that a friend uses to navigate their own crisis. The culture of radical truth and vulnerability you help build in your family becomes the baseline standard that a child carries into their future organization. You are not just upgrading an isolated avatar. You are writing a vital patch in humanity's open source code. Personal evolution is the fundamental prerequisite for cultural evolution.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this right now? We have covered a massive amount of ground. Load-bearing walls, metamatics, the physics of IKEA bookshelves, the 11-step operational flow, the compounding math of mastery, and the legacy of your practice. It is a lot. But I want to leave you with the simplest, most potent distillation of all this complex architecture. It ultimately comes down to this: clean inputs, honest scoreboards, and a daily return to the drum.
Mind your feed, both mentally and nutritionally. Choose your metrics based on reality, not ego. Trust your body's signals.
That graduation ceremony we talked about at the very beginning, the one taking place inside the building we are actively knocking down, it's happening right now. And it will happen again tomorrow. And the next day. Because the architecture of your own meaning is never truly finished. It just keeps evolving, cycle after cycle, multiplied by everything you have already become.
The controller is in your hand. The position of one is yours to hold.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.